Fiona and I were about to talk to two Davids, actually, who are both active members of Scottish CND. And in particular, they're involved with a campaign that's called It's Time to Reclaim Our Clyde. So before we tell you a bit more about that, we just want to kind of make a comparison with last week's podcast, which was when Fiona and I talked to Bill Ramsey and Isabel Lindsay about world politics, strategies or lack of them that seem to be coming out of the White House or out of 10 Downing Street. And it was a discussion on a wide-ranging scale, maybe entering, a brave new world. Well, let's hope it's brave new world, because the kind of alliances and blocks between countries suddenly seem to have got much more fluid. So it was a very wide-ranging discussion. And now we're talking to two guys who are just passionate about wanting to get the River Clyde back, free from nuclear weapons, and who are out and about with a stall, and they go down Greenock, and they go down to Gourock, and they go down to Helensburgh, and they just talk to people. What struck me about the two conversations was, one was big, wide-ranging, global kind of thoughts, as it were, and this one was, let's go out and put a gazebo up and get some pamphlets and tell people about what's going on further down the Clyde.
If you asked any young person right now, I'm pretty sure they'll have heard of Trump, they'll have heard of Putin, they'll have heard of what's going on in Ukraine. But what the guys at SCND were finding was they don't know that there's weapons on the Clyde. So even people who live on the Clyde don't know the nuclear arsenal that's sitting there and how it ties in with all these events that appear to be happening on the other side of the continent. And I think what they're doing, getting out there and actually connecting with people and going into schools and sharing information, is absolutely vital, because our young people are being failed by not getting the information that they need.
Yeah.
So let's welcome the two Davids into the studio, and they've brought some photos from being out and about, so we'll share some of those as well, and I think you'll find this very interesting. Welcome to the studio, lovely to have you. I mean, how this sort of came about was that Jean had got in touch with us asking if we could come to some of your stalls and do some filming, and unfortunately we just happened to be in such a busy period that none of the dates we were available to come. So we kind of suggested, well, let's have you in the studio instead, and you can tell us about the campaign. What is the campaign? Where did it come from?
Glasgow CND and other groups, I should say, they're not really branches, do street stalls. In Glasgow, we probably do more than anybody else, because we do stalls in the street, at music festivals, sometimes at community festivals. And we talk to people. We give them leaflets, but we try to talk to them about the nuclear weapons on the Clyde, particularly young people. And what we have found is that a very high proportion of the young people know little or nothing about the nuclear weapons on the Clyde. An awful lot of them don't know there are any nuclear weapons on the Clyde.
It's true.
They don't know where they are. They don't know how many they are. They don't know what they are.
Wow.
And we just feel that that's terrible, really. They have a right to know. And they don't get that information from the media. They're obviously not getting it from schools, despite the fact that David there goes to schools and talks to classes. And they obviously are not getting it from the parents either. So we feel that we've got the responsibility to do that. We have obviously a personal motivation for doing it as well, which is that the only way we're going to get rid of these weapons is by, first of all, people voting for independence, and that's getting independence, however it comes about, I don't know. Secondly, electing a government which will sign or become a signatory to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and then taking advantage of that by international bodies requiring England, or whatever it's called at that time, to remove the weapons from Scotland as quickly as possible. And we have a timetable worked out for that. It's all perfectly feasible. So that was the reasoning. And the reason we're focusing on young people is because we found that about 65% of young people support independence. Unfortunately, only about half of those people actually vote. So what we need to do to get a majority in favour of independence is to get more of these young people to vote. And then there's many reasons why they might want to vote for independence. We're giving them another reason, if you like, which is to get rid of nuclear weapons before they get rid of us.
So there's a logo and a name.
It's time to reclaim the Clyde.
Okay, it's time to reclaim the tide. We have an emotional connection with the river, don't we? We have an emotional connection with the Clyde. I mean, you know, it might go back to if you were really old enough and lived in the city, remembering when it was full of, you know, ships and there was so much more activity down in the docks. Not like that now. But even without that, it's such a beautiful kind of estuary. So when I saw that as the name of the campaign, I thought that was good. And Scottish CND groups that are based, or you know, people who live along the Clyde, that you've got together to make this happen. Is that right? Tell us a bit about how that came about.
But we've got groups in Ayrshire, Arran, Renfrewshire, which of course covers River Clyde as well, and Glasgow. And there are groups in the other areas like Dumbarton and so on. But there are members there who will support this campaign. The idea was that we should make it a joint campaign, partly because we can see we live here, we work here too. You know, we're not based down in Norfolk or somewhere. We're based here. This is our Clyde and your Clyde, and we thought it would also be able to pool our resources. So when we go out and have stalls, we'd have more people there because people would come from Glasgow and Renfrewshire and so on. It was a coming together. It's not an SCND campaign. They support us, but the campaign is the groups on the Clyde, the people on the Clyde.
My recollection is that David, Kate and I were down visiting Faslane Peace Camp, who are also part of this campaign. And a young artist, Jack Daly, had been preparing some stuff to sell to get funds, you know, like a shopping bag with his logo on it. And as we left, he gave us this little snippet of material. And my recollection is that while Kate and I saw a charming piece of artwork, David imagined a campaign. Yeah. There's one little change when I talked about it at the Scottish CND executive. I'm in the SCND executive. Isabel Lindsay, who's been campaigning against nuclear weapons for more than 60 years.
Yeah, she was our guest last week, actually.
You know, she knows everything and everybody, yeah? Said, surely reclaim our Clyde. I would quite like that. I quite like it because it is our Clyde, really, isn't it? And that because we have a responsibility to the Clyde, just as almost the Clyde is a responsibility to us, and it's why we're here. Once upon a time, it was a source of fresh water, you know.
Why is it a hare? Is the Clyde famous for hares?
I've never asked Jack, actually. I don't know. Have you ever asked Jack, David?
I haven't, but I've been asked that question more than once.
Yeah, I think it shows it's a kind of coming together of nature and people to be regenerate the Clyde, because we'll have to do it together, you know, and there are opportunities to regenerate nature if we can get rid of the submarines, which is polluting our water, and putting bombs under our hills and so on. You know, so that's what I see. It's a coming together of people and nature.
Yeah, there's no dolphins in the Faslane Naval Base, but there's also no hares. You know, I mean, it's very much. It's not just the water that's the problem. It's the entire land mass surrounding it.
And convoys going to and from the base as well. So you sent us a whole load of pictures of lots of different stalls. So shall we put some of those up and you can tell us a bit about what you're hearing, what you're doing? That looks like a windy day.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Ros has a problem with her arms, and I have a problem with my right arm, which means I couldn't push up all the way up. So I thought it was quite artistic, actually.
I laughed at that one because I have been in that situation quite a lot with trying to put up stalls for pensioners for independence, and for similar sorts of reasons, you can't quite kind of get up, or it's too windy. Actually, I quite like one, but
we've got Greenock as well.
From Greenock.
There we are.
Oh no, I reckon is that not one of?
Yeah,
it certainly is. That's Ronnie. He's part of the campaign, and
with his grandchild.
Yes.
I was wondering if there was an actual bairn in the
There
pram,
was
or
an
if you had
actual
a.
bairn there, yes.
Well,
Yeah.
it wasn't.
You'll probably recognise the emergency babysitting phone call just when you're going out the door. And it was lovely to have a bairn with us.
That just makes
Yeah.
the point, doesn't it?
Yes,
Bairns.
I
First
thought-
time we've ever had Bairns Not Bombs poster and a bairn.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Lovely to have the average age of attendee but down below 60 for once.
Do you get? Oh, I was just waiting to say, do you get younger people to
Yeah.
campaign with you? Looks like you managed it in that one. Where's that taken?
That's down at the museum, the Riverside Museum.
Oh yes,
Is-
yeah.
It was the Riverside Music Festival.
Yeah.
Not the one they have now. You can see the huge queue of people in the background there, and we were
Yeah.
standing where most of them were coming into the area, and lots of young people stopped, partly because we were offering them temporary tattoos, as you can see there. A lot of young people were very interested, very supportive.
I was just harking back to what you said about, younger people. Yeah, they support independence. They support independence, top marks. They don't vote, don't get many marks for that. And then you finding out, actually they don't know much about nuclear weapons. And I mean, I don't know, presumably they don't know much about them worldwide if they don't know much about them in Scotland. When I was in that category of the youngsters, like, teenage 20s, I mean, supporting the SCND was cool. It was one of the cool things to do, to be against nuclear arms. It was, in a sense, it was going against how things were. It was a bit rebellious. And so it's just interesting when a couple of generations go by and you've got young people coming through and they don't know anything about it. I mean, do schools not teach them anything about nuclear arms race?
Good question. I've another hat I wear is Peace Education Scotland, and I sometimes go into schools specifically to talk about nuclear weapons. Now, it requires quite an enlightened modern studies teacher, obviously, but it's extraordinarily well received. And once you've talked to them for 15 or 20 minutes, there's nobody putting their hand up saying, let's kill all the Russians, I mean, they do get it, as long as you present them with the facts. We have a very special relationship with nuclear weapons in the Clyde estuary compared to the rest of Britain.
Yeah.
Because we're not just at threat from foreign power deciding, let's take out all Britain's nuclear weapons by dropping a bomb on them. We've got rusty, leaky old nuclear boats sailing up the river, coming down the River Clyde, leaking absolutely horrible stuff into the Clyde, in ever increasing, although the regulations keep allowing them to increase into the water as more nuclear submarines arrive. So we've got almost a special kind of responsibility here in the Clyde for getting rid of these things, because we're at day-to-day risk just from pollution. We've also started to do some very difficult arithmetic about jobs. I mean, some of the things we actually hear when we're out in the street is, what about the jobs? As if somehow employment was a possible balance for nuclear annihilation. The UK government makes it very hard to get the actual figures. So all of these things put in a special twist on the usual anti-nuclear argument. Most of us worldwide in the anti-nuclear weapons campaign think of them as evil incarnate, and that's simply good enough reason for getting rid of them.
Right.
But actually, we could create an enormous amount of employment and remove a huge source of pollution from the lives of everyone in Clyde.
We would, of course, then have presumably a well kitted out and very useful deep water port there that could be used. I mean, presumably could be used for anything, but it could certainly be used for a Scottish, naval defence forces, presumably. Yeah.
That's what the SNP have said they would do with it, because obviously it's a ready-made base for ships.
It's been a naval base since World War I.
It's big enough to function as, I think, what do they call it? Tripartite centre for all the Army, Navy and Air Force. And that seems to me like a very sensible idea, and that would mitigate against the loss of jobs with the British sailors going. We would replace them with Scottish sailors and airmen and so on.
Some Scottish politicians reckon, of course, that there's just thousands of others' jobs in the background, don't they? Because of the other services that they use. But
well, there are contractors and so on. Some of them come from Ireland, by the way. But there was an article I read a while ago which said that they were looking at the proportion of the number of jobs created by military establishments in the chain, you know, out with the actual military themselves. And they found that the west of Scotland had one of the lowest rates of job creation outside the actual base.
yeah.
Our latest podcast episode, which has got Isabel Lindsay and Bill Ramsey talking about the implications of developments in America. And one of the things they were talking about is, why do we need this increase in the defense when, you know, it's not as if the Russians who've made 10 feet of progress over 3 years in Ukraine are ever going to reach us anytime soon. And yet it's being presented as this immediate threat we're under, and you can see the sort of rallying cries about, oh, see, this is why we need the nukes. Are you finding that the narrative's changing at all because of current events?
A few people, not a lot. I think people are maybe a bit confused about what's going on. It's quite, I mean, it's quite almost unprecedented, the situation we're in. So I think people will take time to, you know, really get to grips with it and understand what is happening. I find it difficult. But I don't think it's changed people's attitudes to nuclear weapons. I think it's made them more aware of them.
Mm. Once upon a time, we thought we needed nuclear weapons in case Russia's vast arsenal of 6,000 tanks came strolling through Europe. Well, Ukraine's destroyed half of those with NATO cast-offs. But I think it's just too early to tell. Extraordinary stories like in the paper today, Germany considering cancelling its order for F-35 fighters because they're worried there might be an American kill switch in that would prevent them using them.
Well, that's one of Bill Ramsey's theories, is that there's a patch on the submarines that it's up to the Americans as to whether the armaments would fire or not. So
I find it astonishing that they wouldn't have such a thing. I mean, it took 20 years, but now we know the French did have a kill switch in the Exocet missile that destroyed HMS Sheffield, but decided not to use it. It's just such a colossal waste of money for us and huge profits for the armament industry.
And that's the real driver, isn't it?
I mean, the thing that limited marketing budget, right, and are happy to take MPs all the way around the world to see one thing or the other. You know, it's very difficult to follow the money. I think whenever is my first approach when I don't understand the politics, is to follow.
Yeah.
That's an important point, though. I mean, the government likes to tell us that these weapons are independent. They're British. Britain controls them. Absolutely not true. You know, the bits that America supplies, the software they supply, there's just so many things, and we're the only one of the 9 countries which have got these weapons which is dependent on another country. France's are actually independent. Ours are not independent.
The only 9 countries in the world have got nuclear weapons, you know, and yet the disproportionate power and fear that creates. I heard recently that the support for TPNW is actually growing.
Oh, it is.
Possibly because of what's happening. So,
well, there was a meeting in New York last week, wasn't it, David?
Yeah, the third meeting of Party States was last week in New York.
And they released
TPNW.
how many people are now signed up to the TPNW. I can't remember, but I think it's more than half the countries in the world now.
yeah.
We're about halfway there.
This must have been on the steps in Glasgow, is it? Only 9 countries have nuclear weapons. Over 200 choose not to have them. That's a hugely, reassuring and positive thing.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, we've been banging on about this for quite some time, and it's not finished yet, that's for sure.
From what David was saying, the way to get rid of nuclear weapons in Scotland is for Scotland to be independent. It's not going to happen if we're not independent. I mean, I think that's kind of, a no-brainer, really.
Well, just for one reason alone, if I can say this, British government is building 4 new submarines now. They've got new warheads. America and Britain are developing, America are developing a new missile. These things will last for at least 30 years. So if we don't get rid of them, we're going to have them until the 2060s.
Yeah.
And we'll be paying for them all that time.
Yes,
And
all
we'll
that
be paying for them all that time, and that will dominate public expenditure in Britain, because it's talking about billions of pounds.
Spending 200 billion on nuclear weapons counts as economic growth.
I know.
I heard a thing quite recently, and it was, humankind will be the only species that has destroyed itself because it wasn't cost effective to save itself. That was in relation to climate change, but it equally works for the nuclear argument as well.
Yeah, it does.
Just looking at some of the pictures that you said, I think that imagery like that is quite eye-catching though, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
I mean, there's one that we've got in the first of the videos that we're producing. I think it's a cigarette packet, because cigarettes kill. Well, this one's full of nuclear weapons, which kill rather more people, probably.
Are those videos going to be part? Are they specific to It's Time to Reclaim Our Clyde, or is it more general?
They're specific. We're currently making them. But, I mean, there'll be one, for example, which is sort of really making the point that these things make us a target. Right? So it tells people where they are and what they are, and that we are a target, and how many people could get killed depending on which way the wind is blowing and so on. But making the point really that nobody living in at least the central belt of Scotland would be safe. That's from the sort of northwest, which happens, but not obviously as much as the southwest.
Well, I'm delighted to say I live see where at the edge where Tillycootery is. I'm just to the other side of Tillycootery, so I'll be fine.
Well, not really. I mean, I'll be dead because I'm in Glasgow, so I'll have just gone. Like, I'll be out of it. Whereas you probably could be very, very sick.
The starving as well,
And starving.
The wind is more likely to be coming from the southwest, so they're right over.
Now, of course, that's the plume of a single bomb exploding. If that bomb was to hit Coolpot bomb store, then the radioactive material from 260 nuclear bombs instead of just one would be spread over, and really the whole of Scotland's orange.
Yeah, you're going to need a bigger map. Yeah. You almost feel yourself wanting to make light of it as a way of coping with the ideas. Yeah,
we have to do that. But we'll have other videos as well. There'll be one about the convoys, the dangers of those, because for years the Ministry of Defence said there's no danger, nothing, they couldn't possibly explode, and then their own one of the units within the Ministry of Defence produced a report which said, well, actually they could, if there was a convoy crash, the vehicles came together in a crash, there could be an explosion, not an actual bomb going off, but an explosion which could release uranium and
plutonium, all this
plutonium into an area around about where the explosion takes place, and it would happen so quickly that nobody could do anything about it.
So is your campaign a combination then of stalls and awareness raising along with the videos? Is there any other elements to it?
At the moment we've been doing stalls, but we've always recognised that we won't reach enough people by having stalls, and we won't reach enough young people because they're not out in the streets. We don't know where they are actually, to be honest, but they're not out in the streets when we're out in the streets on a Saturday afternoon. And most people are in shopping centres which are out indoors, and they won't let us in.
They won't let you in.
So we have to just go where we can in the streets. I think that's a terrible thing that's happened actually, but privatisation, shopping space. But it is a part of what we're doing. The second thing will be the videos, which we'll be putting on YouTube. They'll be short videos, 7.5 minutes, something like that maximum. But they can also go on to other things like TikTok and so on as little clips from the videos. So hopefully, around about May, it's still a year before the elections.
One of the photos that you sent was this one. So now, I know this is Bill. This is Bill Kidd. He's my MSP, so I know him anyway. But I also know that he's worked so much for such a long time with ICANN. Actually, to the extent that he was one of the group of people who was presented with the Peace Prize, I think a few years back. And do you think people really understand enough about what ICANN does, and also about the treaty that means if we were to sign it as an independent country, we would then get help from other, interested countries to help us then negotiate removing nuclear weapons from Scotland. Do you think people really kind of know much about that? I mean, I know quite a lot about it, but it's because I know Bill.
No, I don't think they do know a lot about it, to be honest. I mean, usually when we say to them, we're actually one of the few countries that can actually get rid of these things. There's specific reference to our circumstances in the bill, or the treaty as it is now. And it's not really, I mean, there will be negotiations, of course there will. England will be terrified at the thought of losing their nuclear weapons because there's nowhere else to put them. That's their problem. They're not going to, they can put the submarine somewhere, but they can't put 260 nuclear weapons somewhere. They don't have a convenient mountain near a port facility. So they'll be terrified. They'll want to say, oh, well, no, I mean, you will need 20 years to do this, build a new facility, or 50 years, or 150 years, But the international authorities won't put up with that, because they've said it's to happen as quickly as possible. If you had to think about it, if Scotland was determined enough, we could stop it anyway. We could block the channel into the Gairloch.
Yes.
Yeah.
Stop them coming up the roads for England with their convoys, which carry the fuel for the submarines, some of them. And we could do all sorts of things to stop them happening.
What you were saying about young people don't really know very much about it. I mean, that is definitely different from when I was young. It was always there in the background, and there was that duck and cover, and even Raymond Briggs and his, you didn't have to look far to see, aimed at all different ages. It was there. It hung over you in the air. This terrible threat. And now I don't get a sense that is out there at all. And maybe it's because there's so many other awful things facing people, between the climate emergency, the wars in Europe and the Middle East, and the cost of living. I mean, there's just so much to worry, particularly young people. I just wonder if that's just a one that slid into the background.
I think there's a number of reasons for it. I think one is that back in those days, when I remember the 60s, we all thought we were going to change the world, make it better, We're not quite so optimistic.
How did that go?
There isn't that mood of optimism and confidence that we can make things better on the basis of experience of having campaigned against the Iraq War. 90,000 people in Glasgow, 1 million people on the streets in London. It made no difference whatsoever. So there is a kind of a weariness about it, I suppose. We've tried that before, and it didn't work. Another thing, though, is that with young people, these things have been on the Clyde all their lives.
Yeah.
It hasn't gone wrong yet.
They haven't gone wrong yet, but they've not just arrived. Those days, the old days, they'd only just arrived. That's why people were out in canoes on the Gairloch trying to stop them.
I love the analogy that David McKenzie gave of the two great crises we face, of the climate emergency and the nuclear emergency. He imagines we're living in a house with dry rot, right? And beside an open fire, there's a pail of petrol. Well, if we do nothing about the dry rot, then it will actually kill us all. It is falling down. Climate change is happening. You can see it all around you. But as long as nobody knocks over the bucket of petrol, we'll be fine. It's just that we won't even notice it if it happens. There'll be a whoomph and we're all gone. And so it's much easier to be engaged with the crisis that people can see every single day, as every month is the warmest month of all time. And the sea level is measurably rising, and so on and so forth. And there hasn't been the catastrophic, life-ending catastrophe that nuclear weapons will bring, because that only needs to happen the once, and it's very easy not to notice. And David's right, these submarines have been sailing up and down the Clyde for 60 years and nothing's happened yet.
I think something has happened, though, and that is Trump. These ships are controlled by America. And President Trump, his advisors, but he's the one that has to make the decision. And that's different, this guy, we can't predict what he will do.
No.
But we can't. He could use them. He might, and possibly if he was going to attack Russia, let's say, would he not be tempted maybe to use the British the British submarines, and Russia would want to destroy them? And he might think, well, they could destroy them, and that will take the focus away from them destroying something in America.
Yeah, but he couldn't use the British submarines without the agreement of the British government, or someone might be able to stop the rockets firing. But I mean, it takes someone in the British Navy to start the submarine up and take it out of Faslane, doesn't it?
I don't think we actually know whether or not America could use British submarines with the weapons on them.
It's a secret. We don't know. There is a submarine out there. There's always one at sea.
Yeah.
Well, of course, now that there are at least 2 of them not working at any time, they could be out there for 6 months at the bottom of the sea somewhere, and just a push of a button away from launching a missile.
Yeah.
The missile is American. The launch system's American. I don't know.
Targeting systems American, everything.
Yeah.
So,
But the finger is British. The finger that has to press the button is British, isn't it?
Well,
Sorry, I seem to be arguing pro the UK government, which I never ever do actually these days. But you know, it's not Americans who are in the British subs. It's
the question of what we believe. What do we believe? They tell us they're independent. Perfectly obvious that they're not independent.
Mm.
Oh yeah, I'm
You
absolutely
see-
not arguing with that. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's not an independent deterrent. Oh, I'm probably with Bill actually. Probably there is a patch on it that they could decide whether or not to let it actually activate. But there's a difference between that kind of dependency and actually what happens on a British naval vessel, isn't there?
Yeah, but what I'm really trying to say is that we're told they're independent. We know they're not. So what else are we told isn't true? I mean,
Yeah.
they say that the Prime Minister has the right to determine whether or not to use the missiles, even if it's in a nuclear war and we are part of the NATO forces. They say that the Prime Minister is the only one who can make that decision. But is that true? I don't know.
Find that highly unlikely these days,
It's
actually.
highly unlikely. I mean,
Yeah. I think nowadays that there seems to be a really concerted push to sort of make nuclear power appear very cuddly and friendly and clean and green.
I want this
that-
one. I want this one. Yeah.
On you go.
I have a real bee in my bonnet about how there is no civil nuclear power industry. Right? There is a nuclear industry. Our nuclear missiles, our nuclear bombs require tritium as part of the fuse. And the only place you get tritium is from a fusion civil reactor. Right? Now, until late this year, we've had a supply from a special type of Canadian nuclear reactor for all of Britain's tritium. And the last of those reactors shuts down this year. So we need in Britain a new range of nuclear power stations in order to make the tritium to power our bombs. Tritium only has a half-life of 12 years. That's why there's a shuttle service of nuclear warheads between Coolport and Birkhead, is because the tritium needs replenished. Yeah.
So is that why Labour are suddenly so pro-nuclear then?
Well, also possibly because of the usual bribery and corruption with giant corporations. But essentially, without a new range of nuclear power stations, we will not have a so-called nuclear deterrent. And we know that the ones that are years late coming in, and, Sizewell C, which is, 10 years late and 200% over budget, whatever it is, aren't equipped. They need to have a special type of design of tritium capture facilities around the central core. And our small modular reactors that Rolls-Royce are proposing would be perfect to design that. So it's a major challenge that if you don't have tritium from a civilian nuclear power station, you do not have hydrogen bombs. You can still make the old-fashioned Hiroshima bomb just from uranium, the sort of thing, for example, Iran could make without having its own nuclear power station. It could still refine uranium to the point where it could make a bomb. But it can't make a plutonium-based bomb without a nuclear power station, and you can't trigger a hydrogen bomb without tritium.
Wow, I had no inkling of any of that. Did you know about that, Marlene?
Well, I knew what tritium. I know what tritium is. I mean, the question that raised when you started talking about tritium, because I think, well, that's hydrogen. Do we have any hydrogen bombs, or are ours
All bombs are hydrogen bombs. They're all hydrogen bombs.
Oh, well, see, I didn't know that.
As soon as it was possible to make them, because they're vastly more explosive
Yeah.
than conventional fusion bomb. And indeed, we actually have the same number of fusion as we have fission bombs, because it's so difficult to make a hydrogen bomb go off. You need a conventional atomic bomb as a trigger.
Yeah.
Right, so our atomic warheads have essentially 2 bombs in them, or 3 bombs in them. The huge explosive charge to set off the atomic bomb, which creates the neutron flush through the tritium into the hydrogen bomb component. Yeah.
I'm rapidly becoming depressed just talking about this.
It's engineering and scientific genius, and we could have been solving world hunger, you know.
Yeah. That just seems to have leapt into the sort of away from the cuddly, friendly nuclear's the green savior into a massively more scary thing. So, I mean, we listen to this stuff all the time. I didn't know that. Marlene understands it better than I did, but hadn't heard all of it. So, how do we get that message out and connect it with people? Because that's horrifying.
It's horrifying.
Well, the reason we're doing the videos is young people are watching less television now.
Oh yeah, markedly less.
One of the things that they do watch is short videos under 10 minutes on YouTube. That's why we're making these videos. But another thing that we're going to do is, and this came out of our being at outside the Transmit Festival last year or the year before, hundreds of kids going past us, and David noticed that there was a man who had a big microphone, and he was recording young people's views about, what was it? I don't know.
They had the magic giant furry microphone, just created a queue of children wanting to be on YouTube,
So we're going to interview them as well.
Good.
Good for you.
Did you notice recently the Labour Party's just a video with young people saying how wonderful nuclear weapons are, and that they're very pleased we're going to have lots more of them. And it was 2 very clean-looking middle-class kids from the southeast of England somewhere. Nobody from Scotland allowed.
I thought you were joking, actually, when you started that sentence. So I take it, that's not a joke. Honestly, that is just awful, isn't it? I mean, God, what's the Labour Party come to? I mean,
I'll tell you what.
I mean, you're not surprised you can find a couple of young people that would say that, especially if you go out and specifically look for them. But what on earth is the Labour Party doing that? It's just
shameful, the Labour Party. I mean, I heard yesterday on the news, my useless Labour MP for Dollar and Dunfermline, one of the 5 who signed up with Starmer to attack people on disability benefits. And you think, hang on a minute, most of the welfare state was created by the Labour Party. Most of the anti-nuclear stuff was championed by the Labour Party, certainly when I was involved in trade union activities. And I just don't recognise them now. I do not recognise them.
Interesting, isn't it? A couple of wee anecdotes. When Keir, can't say his name, was announcing these cuts or new strategy to a big meeting of Labour Party MPs, Diane Abbott was stopped at the door and not allowed in. Yeah.
An actual Labour person.
an actual Labour person, yeah.
I go to quite a lot of the cross-party groups in Holyrood, and Richard Leonard's there, and he's a lovely bloke. I might catch him in a corner one day and ask him what he's still doing in the Labour Party.
Would you want to see the SNP being more vociferous about being anti-nuclear weapons? Are they doing a good enough job, or what would you like to see them doing?
It's an awfully broad church, isn't it? Yes.
But I think they've been quite good in the last few weeks.
There was a good statement by Swinney, wasn't he? He was unequivocal about it.
Yeah. I was beginning to wonder myself if they were still as committed. But when their own member came out and said they should change the policy, that seemed to prompt a reaction, a positive reaction, saying, no, we're not going to do that. We're against nuclear. It's in our blood. It's part of what we are, and we're not going to change. So I thought that was quite good.
Yeah. Good.
I mean, it's interesting watching Reform UK. I mean, they're not anywhere got as big a presence in Scotland as they have elsewhere, but they've still got way more than I would like to see. Yeah. And they are quite clearly pro-nuclear, anti-NHS. I mean, they're just like the anti-Scottishness. I don't understand why anybody's...
I call the attraction to nuclear weapons in Westminster, I call it post-imperial stress disorder, which is a great acronym, I'm not a nationalist. I really don't care whether I live in the People's Republic of Carlton or the United States of Europe. I care about the moral and defence policy executed in my name. The foreign and defence policy executed. That's why I'm here. So I voted SNP for 50 years on the basis that they're going to get rid of nuclear weapons and not send young men abroad to kill brown people. Yeah. And that's enough, really.
We're with you on that one.
Yep.
That conference you did, was it last year or the year before? I can't remember.
Yeah.
That was, we thought that was a great event. We did a video, a podcast about that as well. Are you likely to do anything like that coming up?
May 17th.
Ooh.
May the 17th. It's not formally announced other than to CND members, but there's another conference coming up.
We shall add that to our calendar then.
It sounded from what you were saying about the videos, David, that part of that is with an eye to the Holyrood elections.
Oh, yeah.
It's got to be a plan.
We've got to get those kids more aware than they are now in time to vote for the independence in May 2026.
Yeah. I personally will be at those polls, not so much voting for Scottish independence, but for voting to get rid of nuclear weapons. And the two are conjoined. I mean, you vote, if you want rid of nuclear weapons, you vote SNP.
I'm just making sure we get that one into this particular video. It's just such a beautiful shot of the Clyde. It's just gorgeous.
There's one that we use. It's quite a nice one as well.
That one?
That's it, yeah. I think that's a nice one.
That's got the name of your campaign on it as well,
Yeah.
which is perhaps even better. Right, well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a very interesting, as always, it's an interesting hour, but some scary bits in it, but also some hopeful bits. So if you've got one final message to our listeners, how can they get involved? How can they help the campaign? What can they do?
Get in touch with us, offer to have local stalls, come to our stalls, talk to people, tell them about nuclear weapons, encourage them to vote for independence.
That's top of my life. Vote for independence. That's the way out of this mess.
Right. And they can get details of your stalls from your website?
From the Facebook page.
Also going to be on banthebomb.org. They have a What's On page. So they'll all be on there, and there's a link to us as well. So
brilliant. We'll put the links in the notes underneath this podcast, and anybody who would like to get more involved, then that's the route.
Just remember that somebody once said that if everybody who supports independence gets one other person to vote for independence, we're there.
Job done.
We're there.
Yep.
Right. Let's go and find them.
Yeah, thanks for coming along, both of you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're listening on YouTube, you can click the little bell and you get a reminder whenever we put out a new episode, which is every Friday.
And sign up for our mailing list. You can do that from the website. And we always send one out at the beginning of each month to tell you what's happening. Last but not least, you can buy us a coffee on coffee.com.
And we'll catch you later. Bye now.